is ZFM Stereo Talk.
Can we begin by looking at Zimbabwe's debt clearance plan?
We have since cleared our arrears to the IMF, and right now, clearance of arrears to the African Development Bank and the World Bank is underway. It's work in progress. And I'm confident that we should be able to reach an understanding this year.
The talk that gets you talking. Mondays to Thursdays between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m.
The platform. Step up and speak out.
It is a good evening, and you're tuned into ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town. It's 29 minutes before the hour of before the hour of 8 o'clock on this 28th February 2018. And today we have a very interesting topic that we're going to go through. It's going to be an interesting debate. I'm hoping that you can be part of the conversation. Of course, I'll be giving you the ways you can contact us throughout the show in just a bit. And just to remind you of our frequencies, Chivu 99.8, Kama TV Wange 105.1, Chimani Mani 91.3, Victoria Falls 106.5, Mutora Shanga 97.6. Let's have a look at Gweru 104.3, Mashingo 96.1, Mutare 95.4, Bulawayo, my hometown 106.7, and we're broadcasting out of Harare, where our frequency is 106.4. Listen to us over the internet, of course, and just go to www.zfmstereo.co.zw, and then also catch us on the TuneIn app. Download it via whatever app store that you use, and you can listen to us live and in charge. And just to tell you about our social media platforms, facebook.com/ZFM Stereo, on Twitter at ZFM Stereo, on Instagram at ZFM Stereo ZW, and of course this show will be available tomorrow or by the next day via our podcast platform. So just keep an eye out from it, and that is on YouTube. That's where we that's where we put up our podcasts. And to get in touch with us throughout the show, our call-in number is 0772 168 045, and our WhatsApp number is 0731 168 045. So keep those numbers in mind, and the phone lines as well as the WhatsApp lines are open immediately. Now, Africa is the second fastest developing continent after Eastern Asia, and through the African Union Sustainable Development Goals that have been set out under Agenda 2063, one of the big issues is about information. There's a big information gap in Africa at the moment. Now, a project is coming out, and I'm not going to speak too much about the project first. I'm going to ask our guest to speak about the project himself. He's a man who is an academic. He's a world record holder. He's a person who has done a lot in his an explorer as well. We're going to talk to him about that in just a little bit. But in the studio from the Book of African Records, the man behind it, the one who launched the Book of African Records, is Ambassador Kwame Muzawazi. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Larry. A very good evening to the listeners of Z, and it's a pleasure to be here.
I know that I just glossed over, and it was on purpose that I glossed over the introduction, because I wanted you to give us the weight of it all yourselves. Who is Ambassador Kwame Muzawazi?
Well, he is a Pan-Africanist. I wasn't born Kwame. Mm-hmm. I was born Errol. And I was given the name Errol because I believe my parents had the best interests of mine at heart, just like many parents who give their children names that will make it easy for them to be accepted at school, at universities. But when I went for higher education in Poland, there is a time every year we used to have what was called the International Students' Day, where people were supposed to guess which country you are from by your name, your first name. And we had thousands of people in the gallery, observing this, etc. When it came to my turn to go on stage, and I was introduced as Errol, hundreds of people said, because I'm Errol, I should be from the United Kingdom. that is when I realized that I had the wrong address. I had the wrong name because it was misleading. So I decided to, if you wish, culturally indigenize myself and root myself in Africa. So I came back home. It was part of finding myself. So I am, if you wish, a later day Pan-Africanist who does not see borders in terms of African country borders, but the continental view of ourselves as Africans.
Okay, I get that part, but I want to ask then, if given that the first experience was that you were, it was about identification of your name by I mean your country of origin by your name, wouldn't it have been more sense to have a Zimbabwean name, for example? I mean, I know your second name is Zimbabwean, but wouldn't that have been the case then?
Yeah, that is precisely the case. Why should my name be Zimbabwean as opposed to it being African? Remember, as far as I'm concerned, you are African first, and then later you are Zimbabwean. Why am I saying that? Because all the 55 African countries are artificial creations that emanated from the 1884 Berlin Conference. Until 1884, the people of Africa were only divided by the rivers and the forests. But some other people met. You know, I was reading the minutes from the 1884 Berlin Conference. And it is a sad story because some of our borders in Africa, if you look at, for example, a country like Namibia, which you see as if they took a ruler and they just slashed and just drew that this is the way Namibia ends and this is where Angola begins. I actually was shocked to observe that the borders of Africa were drawn during the night when the conference participants had taken too much whiskey and created borders of Africa which did not pay heed to the reality of tribe, language, identity. So the Zimbabweanness, yes, we have a country called Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe is a country within the context of a bigger structure, a bigger idea called Africa. So the people of Africa should see themselves more as Africans as opposed to being Algerians, Congolese, South Africans, Zimbabweans.
Okay, you tune into ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town. We are talking about the African Fact Book that we'll be talking about in a bit, but just a little bit more on in as far as that is concerned. There is an accomplishment that you had in which you did in 2010 121 hours of lecturing that entered into the Guinness Book of Records. What was the point behind that?
Well, the lecture was on the role of young African youth in development. It is a topic that I'm very passionate about. As you might be aware, Larry, the demographics of Africa are radically changing. 70% of Africans today are below the age of 30. 70% of the people of Africa are below the age of 30. Therefore, it is very important in terms of development to involve these young people in whatever developmental plans that we do have. So, unfortunately, I realized if I spoke for 1 hour, no one would take me seriously. So I had to really drive the point home and speak until people listened.
Okay. On 0731-168-045, someone here, okay, please put your names when you do get in touch with us, says, okay, we understand that you had to give yourself a name from Ghana, but why specifically Ghana? Why did you not give one from, if you said Africa does not have borders, why did you not give one from somewhere that you're closer to so that you can make certain areas of Africa more popular?
Very, very good question. The name Kwame came about when I decided to plunge into a journey across 21 African countries. Driving alone in the year 2010, I began a journey from the north of Africa, in Morocco, right down to South Africa. In the process, I covered 24,000 kilometers, 7 months, and thousands and thousands of African voices that I heard along the way. When I was in Ghana, I went to what is called the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra. And I read about the things that Kwame Nkrumah had done. I read his books, and it immediately became clear to me that what this man was writing about in the 1960s is precisely the reason why I was traveling across Africa. Kwame Nkrumah, who became the first Prime Minister of independent Ghana and the first leader of an independent African country, sacrificed, if you wish to say, his Ghanaianhood for Africa. He said when Ghana gained independence and became the first independent African country that the independence of Ghana is meaningless without the independence of all other African countries. So I thought that this was a great African whose work, ideas need to be revived and realized. Therefore, giving myself his name was my humble gesture to embracing and feathering the ideals of Pan-Africanism.
0731-168-045. I think somebody needs clarification here. He calls you by your former name. Errol says, you just said you went to high school in Poland. Says, but Braz imi manga muri vice head boy wa Timothy Parare high muri apa, what happened? Okay, just clarify.
No, I said I went to Poland for higher education.
Okay, so
it is correct that I went to Churchill High School for Form 1 to Form 4, and for A-level I was at Harare High School, and it was only then after I went to Eastern Europe for higher education.
Okay, I just need a clarification that from you. Now, let's talk about this African fact book. I'm going to make reference to issues that you brought up. I mean, your travels, because there's some interesting things that came up from that are linked to this book. And just remember to get involved in the conversation. Is 0772-168-045. That's our call-in number. And our WhatsApp is 0731-168-045. We're together until half past the hour of 8 o'clock. Now, the question is, what is this book, and how did it come about, the Africa Fact Book?
Okay. In 2015, we came up with what is called the Book of African Records, where we highlight the achievements that Africa and Africans have ever since history began. Because we felt that the achievements of Africa are under-mentioned, undermined, reported, or sometimes not reported at all. So by saying records, we mean we have broken barriers. We've done big things of Africa. If you go into the Book of African Records, you realize you go through documented evidence that, for example, tells you that the oldest running university in the world is a university in Africa, in Tunisia. You will realize that the oldest running library in the world is the St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, and many other discoveries that Africa gave to the world that are never talked about. Even today, big things are happening in Africa, but we never hear about them. So we said, let's talk about them. When this book was published, we took it to the African Union when Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was still the chairperson. She was very, very impressed by this publication, that she directed that it be presented to all the heads of state and government of Africa at the African Union Summit in Kigali, which was held in July 2016. When the heads of state went through this book, they again embraced the message, the Pan-African educational content, which is not just to make people happy, but is based on verified, authenticated facts. And they said, look, we've come up, we've seen this book of African records. We think we can work with these people to come up with a still bigger book, not talking just about facts, about records, but let's come up with an African fact book that talks about all the facts and information known about Africa. And for the first time, Africa has decided to write its own reference source. Because I have to admit, when we were writing the Book of African Records, most of our reference sources were non-African. Today, Larry, if you and I and many other Zimbabweans want to know more about what's happening in Zambia, we have to tune into the BBC, we have to tune into the CNN, and these information sources are non-African. So we actually have to go to London, to Washington, to know more about what's happening next door. So this is a deplorable state of affairs in Africa. So the Africa Fact Book is an answer to the call, which has existed for generations, to come up with a story that is the African story, to come up with a narrative that is the African narrative. So that is basically the thrust behind the Africa Fact Book.
So somebody would sit there and say, okay, that's all very well and good, but the world has been preaching a globalization. So what's the point of having this if I can have the African facts being delivered by and accurately in as far as I can see by, you gave this instance, a satellite channel, this BBC. Why should we have another source? Why not focus on something else?
Those who are preaching globalization, the globalists, especially if they are African globalists, they do not understand what is globalization. Globalization, Larry, is simply a process of the expansion of big corporate multinational organizations that are making money out of the contributions they are receiving from all over the world. That is what sums up globalization. And globalization, mind you, has gone beyond becoming just a monetary financial pursuit. It is now cultural. It is now linguistic. Okay? So we should not be misled to think that globalization is the embracing of existing in these imaginary global villages. There is nothing like that. Most of the people, our people, are suffering because of globalization.
So are you anti-globalization?
Well, let's first agree on what is globalization. And as I've just said, as far as today is concerned, globalization is the expansion of non-African products, non-African services, non-African identities, non-African cultures. And because we are simply being passive, we are simply being observers in this whole process.
So then, is this book meant to just be read by Africans, or are you saying that globalization would not would not have it end up in China or Argentina or somewhere?
No, the Africa Fact Book is to be read by everybody.
So then, doesn't globalization assist, therefore, in making sure that it's accessible as much as we access other cultures?
No, accessing other cultures for educational purposes is very much well recommended. But where accessing other cultures evolves or even changes from being for educational purposes to the point of assimilation and decimation is not what we're talking about. Remember that the people of Africa currently have gone through 500 years of the subjugation of our culture, of our languages, of our achievements. So we have gone through deculturalization, we have gone through dehistoricization. We simply are failing to respond to the need to maintain our African identity. But the Africa Fact Book is not trying to dominate other cultures. It is simply saying, hi, by the way, if you want to know more about Africa, here is the Africa Fact Book. It is our story. Remember the African proverb, until the lion can tell its own story, the story will always glorify the hunter. Okay? So Africa is roaring and saying, we have a story to tell and we can tell it ourselves. Still on this topic, Larry, I want to make it very clear to you that there is an ongoing global war of information. There is a battle for your mind. And that's why when you go to platforms like DSTV, you have 600 channels, where 50 years ago we had only one or two, and yet the crisis of no choice. Now we've got the crisis of too much choice.
Then, before we take a break, we're going to discuss this a little bit more. Someone will sit there and say, okay, no one originally came from here. So someone will say, okay, look, from the stories of the modern day Zimbabweans having walked from Tanzania, Ethiopia, and so forth, coming down to the state, and there'll be accusations of cultural decimation that you're talking about. Isn't it just an evolution of life, really, that at some point certain cultures and civilizations will just disappear? I know we're talking a bit about this. I want to get more into the book, but just over this point, what do you think?
The African cannot continue to be in this state of passivity in the global scheme of things. We had Brexit. What does it tell you about what's happening in the world? The notion of globalization is actually fictional, because Brexit is the epitome, if you wish, of countries that would want to assert their identity, their history. Okay? You go to the United States 2016 presidential election, which shocked the rest of the world. There is a rise of what you want to call tribal politics or identity politics, because those countries you are telling me that are selling globalization are actually coming back to themselves, reclaiming back control, reclaiming back identity. Okay? And it is us, the Africans, our young people, are preferring to die, crossing the Mediterranean Sea, going to Europe, being misled by dreams of greener pastures there, because they think that it is greener on the other side of the river. But that's not the case. So we should study what's happening in the world today. The fictionalism of globalization is being dismantled. and deconstruct it.
I want to, there's these questions, I got a whole bunch of questions coming in. Thank you very much for getting in touch with us. It's 0731 168 045 and our phone line is open on 0772 168 045. As soon as I get a call, I'm going to ask this, give you an opportunity to respond to this after the break. I'm going to take a short break. It says, can Sir please explain African culture? Does Africa have the same culture across it? If Africa is one, but was only separated by rivers and gorges, how is the world not one? What divides the world? Is it not bigger rivers? And finally, Africans are choosing globalization over Africanization. Is that wrong? I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that straight after the break. You're listening to ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town.
Here we go again.
Enjoy world-class radio online. ZFM Stereo is available on TuneIn. Search for ZFM Stereo and you got it. It's ZFM Stereo Talk.
We're always moaning about the state of our roads. Your Worship, Bernard Manyenyeni, thank you, sir, for coming through to the program. Are you receiving money from Zinara? And if you are, what are you using it for?
The crisis we are facing in the last 2-3 years around potholes, firstly, it's not a problem of one city, and secondly, it's not a problem of last year or the year before. It tells the story of the 8 or so years that funds have gone to Zinara and they've not come back to the roads. That's where we are where we are.
The talk that gets you talking. Mondays to Thursdays between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m.
Here we go again.
Enjoy world-class radio online. ZFM Stereo is available on TuneIn. Search for ZFM Stereo and you got it.
The platform. Step up and speak up.
A deep discussion we're having here on ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town. What do you think about this topic that we're talking about? And as far as Africanization, what is it? Africans are choosing globalization over Africanization. And in that case, do you think a book of African facts, or the African fact book, is necessary? Do we need one in Africa? Get in touch with me on 0772 168 045, and that's our call number, and on 0731 168 045. So there, what African culture? Is there one culture? What is African culture?
There certainly is no one culture. We are not saying that we are homogeneous culturally. Africa is very diverse, but at the same time, it is very much united in its diversity. What we are saying is, when God created the world, He gave people identities. Okay? That's why we are so diverse in our languages, in our cultures, etc. And we are not saying that Africanization should be exclusive to learning from other traditions and cultures. Not at all. We are simply saying we need to preserve our identity. We need to talk about and write about our achievements, because if we don't do it, we end up learning about other achievements. I'll give you a very good example. When we grew up, we were told in school here in Zimbabwe that Christopher Columbus was a great man, and we used to sing. But all these African kids who are singing about Christopher Columbus are being misled, because number one, Christopher Columbus was not the first person to travel around the world as he's known for. Okay, it was Ibn Battuta from Morocco who actually traveled way before Christopher Columbus. And by the way, when Christopher Columbus was traveling, he was reading the diaries of Ibn Battuta on how to travel, navigate. So why do we sing about the achievements of Christopher Columbus, who, by the way, has a very bad reputation in Latin America, is a well-known colonizer in Latin America, and he has never been to Africa, never stepped his feet in Africa, but we sing about him. Our teachers and policymakers in education don't seek to change that. So the Book of African Records, and indeed the Africa Fact Book, are only responding to the necessity of Africans generating homegrown knowledge for consumption here in Africa, because it is a need, not just for educational purposes, but for cultural and spiritual needs.
So, from what I'm looking here, there's a bit of revisionism that's going to take place, and as far as history is concerned, how accurate will the revision be, and is there not going to be a possibility that some of this revisionism is going to be, based on cultural nuances or based on certain prejudices of one tribe over the other over time?
No. The Africa Fact Book will be going through a process of scholarship, academic verification, academic cross-validation, and the facts, to as much as possible, will be meticulously verified. So in any case, there is nothing like the perfect state or the perfect publication, but we are saying we will endeavor to, as much as is possible, to come up with an unquestionable publication. All publications in the world are subject to debate, including the Bible itself is subject to debate. So we're not saying we are coming up with the final say on what is African history or what is African information. We are only saying, Africa, could you please, participate in the global war of information and bring your own point of view, because we are just quiet. We need to speak.
So I'm going to go to your diary that we talked about, because you wrote a diary as it was over 179 days, was it? As
Correct.
You travel from the north to the south of
Correct.
Africa.
Correct.
Now, in this diary, you spoke of a trip when you were, starting off in Morocco,
Yes.
isn't it? Where you said, I'm an African, I'm going to read what you wrote. I'm an African holding an African country's passport. And my attempt to travel across the African continent through 21 countries, you will think it's a criminal, you will think is a criminal act due to the grilling, consular rigmaroles that I am forced to encounter. African countries are sometimes, as my follow-up questions, are sometimes accused of paying lip service to this thing that we call unity. And you say that African countries as a union and together said, hey, let's do this, we're all going to work on this, we're going to come up with something solid on this. How would they work together on this initiative when, for example, you just traveling across Africa is so difficult?
Yeah, that's a very good observation. And sometimes when I think about those experiences, it is the sad part of it that today, that's your globalization. An American passport holder from the USA or any European Union member state citizen will be very welcome to travel in Africa more freely without the need for visas than most Africans. A Zimbabwean, for example, can only go to 7 African countries without a visa. Okay? 7 African countries out of 55. Most African countries will require a Zimbabwean to have the visa before departure, or they can have the visa on arrival, but you cannot just go. But other nationalities outside Africa can do so. So what independence are we talking about? Okay, so the issue here is we have to fight, and I am not claiming that I will see all these things in my lifetime, or will you see them in your lifetime? But the issue is not about finishing now. It is about starting now. That is where we need to agree on. These borders, these visa regimes were not created by us, the people of Africa. In fact, the unfortunate thing is we Africans fight each other to say you are French speaking, I'm English speaking, and we don't talk to each other. Yet in Europe, the French and the English are drinking tea together. Okay, the European Union, Larry, I drove across the European Union. I never was stopped at any border. I never saw any border control. In Europe, the people who brought borders and visas here in Africa, where we are struggling with each other here. So you've got to understand that we don't have time as Africa to try to follow the gradualistic footsteps that have been taken by others. We have to sprint where others can afford to walk.
Okay, I'm just going to read a couple of messages here, and then I'll finish it off with a question. The first question, so somebody says, this is Felix from Lulubadzimu, who says, I like the idea of a book because we don't know African trailblazers. A couple of years ago, I met a man who was the first black designer in Zimbabwe and won an award in Italy, but I had never heard his story before. Someone says, interesting topic, even more interesting guest, and says, yes, identity formation is the new education. Africa needs it more. That is a Rector Mish from Bulawayo. And then the final one is someone says, can you please explain African identity and why focus more on the past? Is it really necessary?
No, this is not focusing on the past. It is, if anything, it is actually focusing on the present and the future. But you cannot talk about the future and the present without talking about the past, because we all are coming from somewhere. So we cannot just wake up and say, let's forget about where we are coming from. We have to be informed by, what has taken place, because that is where the wisdom lies. If you look at Africa in terms of our richness in proverbs, we've got a very rich tradition of going back into the past because it is full of wisdom.
Okay, I'm going to take our first call for tonight. You're live on ZFM Stereo. What's your name, contribution, and where you're calling from? Hello, you're live on ZFM Stereo. Okay, seem to have missed that call. Please try and call back again, and let's have this conversation on this very important topic of the Africa Fact Book, and the very juicy discussions we're having. I've got a question from Twitter here. Phineas says, does Kwame believe the United States of Africa is still possible?
Well, it is very much possible, and I believe eventually it is going to occur, because it is in the interest of Africa. I'll tell you something very quickly, Larry, and with due respect, but I hear that the president of Malawi was trying to see the CEO of Toyota in Japan, and the CEO of Toyota said, look, I don't have time to meet the president of Malawi, because Toyota is making a profit of $6 billion per year, yet Malawi has got an income as a country of less than $500 million. So I would ask the president of Malawi to talk to the regional director for Toyota in South Africa, whatever he needs. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say a whole country like Malawi, with a president, he has got no significance internationally in the business sense of the term, because it is not powerful. But if Malawi and Zambia and Zimbabwe and Mozambique speak together, I'm very sure that the CEO of Toyota will have time, because it is now very, very important. And by the way, don't forget that these issues have got an impact on our economic development, the information that we talk about. For example, the Africa Fact Book is a very big business opportunity, a very big economic opportunity for Africa, because we will be able to talk about things that the rest of the world doesn't hear, and they'll come to Africa because we have started to tell them about the achievements that we've made. Right now, for example, I'm very, very shocked that they say that David Livingstone discovered the Victoria Falls, which had always been here since time immemorial, and we've not sought to change these things. So the economic significance of information that is favorable to our situation cannot be underestimated.
You're tuning to ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town. I want to then ask, therefore, because then in the face of the same question, what do you often say when we go to the rest of the world and they say, they treat Africa like it's a country and, as if it doesn't have different places and different identities and so forth. Doesn't the idea of having one singular point of connection, instead of saying having a Zimbabwe fact book and then having a Malawi fact book and that sort of thing, doesn't it fly in the face or even give energy to those people who say, who tend to treat Africa as just one big country?
No. In fact, I'll tell you very happily that the Africa Fact Book is just the umbrella publication in term. But we are going to have Africa Fact Book tourism, Africa Fact Book diplomacy. Just recently, we have, been informed by one prominent African corporate organization that they want to take care of Africa Fact Book proverbs. Okay, so what would stop us from having Africa Fact Book or Malawi, etc., for the purpose of information? That's absolutely important. By the way, most investors, even those who you want to come to your countries with foreign direct investment, don't have the data and information to come to the countries. They are told that there is war in Africa. Larry, I stayed for 10 years outside Africa, going to different parts of the world. When I traveled, there were people whom I met there who would ask me, do I know Will Smith? Is Will Smith my brother? Some would ask me, how did I come from Africa to Europe? Did I walk or were there some special vehicles? Because they don't even know we have airports and they don't even know that we have buildings. They don't know a lot of things. And I forgive them because that is the information they are fed with. And by the way, I'll tell you something. We had a serious fight, for example, with a certain textbook in the Polish educational curriculum, which all the kids in their first year of school are taught and sing. And it says, the people of Africa are black because they don't bath. Okay? And when you are an African walking in the streets of Poland, the kids start singing that poem, which was written in the 17th century, but is still popular today. And those notions, the kids grow up with them, and they form these racial stereotypes because of ignorance and darkness, which is inculcated in these minds, these young minds, at the very, very beginning of their education.
Okay, it seems we're getting a call inside. Oh, you're live on ZFM Stereo. What's your name, contribution, and where are you calling from? Okay, seems to have lost that call. I'm going to do a quick check and ask the taker to check if the phone lines are fine, because we just dropped 2 calls there in a row. From that, there's a question that's come in from a listener who says that if we are focusing on the future, why not have all the info in the fact book on the platforms where the people who stole from us dwell? We must challenge their system where they can hear our voice. Let's be factual. We are part of a global community, and we can't run away from it. It's clearer now more than ever. Is it, so that kind of position, is this a PR campaign to those people? Is it going to be available on platforms that they can access it on?
Yes, it is going to be globally accessible through traditional means and through the new means of broadcasting, social media. It will be very, very easily accessible. I can actually say that this is intended to become the most accessible source of information about Africa ever created.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break once again, and when we come back, we want to focus on this special event that's taking place in the next couple of days that's got to do with this particular Africa Fact Book. You're listening to ZFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town.
Yes, ZFM Stereo is on YouTube. Search for ZFM Stereo and get all the action. It's ZFM Stereo Talk.
Honorable Esau Mufumi, we are always moaning about the state of our roads.
The reason why the government decided to take over the collection of license fees, our councils mostly, they are corrupt. I'm sorry to say that. And that money meant for road repairs was being channeled towards payment of salaries and other things.
The talk that gets you talking. Mondays to Thursdays between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. Connect with ZFM Stereo via Facebook on facebook.com/ZFM Stereo.
The platform. Step up and speak up.
It is the final segment of the platform. My name is Larry Kwirirayi, and we're talking about the Africa Fact Book, and I'm here with, from the Book of African Records, Ambassador Kwame Muzawazi. And Ambassador Muzawazi, what is happening in the next couple of days, particularly the 5th of March?
Yes. The journey for the Africa Fact Book continues. On 5 March in Harare, African countries, African governments, the 8 regional economic communities of Africa, which include SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, COMESA, individuals, academics, corporates, are meeting in Harare to, discuss, talk, exchange views about the Africa Fact Book, but more fundamentally, to raise funds for the Africa Fact Book. This follows a resolution that was adopted in November 2017 by African countries gathered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the African Union HQ, where they said, we resolve as African countries to adopt the Africa Fact Book as a tool of education to enhance our knowledge and pride in Africa. So, after that resolution was adopted, we were given the task as Book of African Records to implement and realize the Africa Fact Book. We came back home, we sat down with the Research Council of Zimbabwe, with the Institute of African Knowledge, and other interested parties to say we really need to get this thing moving. So on 5 March, the people of Africa will descend on Harare to now start the process of actualizing the first edition of the Africa Fact Book, which should be presented to heads of state at the African Union Summit scheduled for January 2019 in Addis Ababa. And when the African Union embraces and approves the first edition, many other editions of various other topics will emerge, and we will take it further to the United Nations, where we want now the world body to recognize the effort that Africa has taken to say we now create and own our own information as Africa.
And where and when is this going to take place?
It's going to be on the 5th of March at the Rainbow Towers here in Harare.
Okay, so, it's a fundraising conference, as you say.
Yes.
But my question is that the only funding that's going to come from the Book of, or the Africa Fact Book? Is it going to just be funded by, gala here, contribution there? Is there no other fund? No,
we've got a robust business plan that we're putting in place that will be discussed as well at the Africa Fact Book. We have got a strategic plan that we would want to be discussed, and various speakers who have impeccable business achievements will be there. There's in fact in the program a topic on business opportunities in the Africa Fact Book, because the participants, especially those who are coming from business, have realized that data, information that is reliable and authenticated is essential to economic prosperity. So the Africa Fact Book is a desperately needed tool not just for education, but even for business, because we need to make informed decisions. And therefore, the Africa Fact Book is answering a pressing call.
Okay, just got another message here. We're going to ask you to repeat all that information just before we go. But got a message here that says the problem with this discussion about Africanism, we're always trying to play the victim. You can't teach anything by using hate. Hope for Africa will only result in our works. We are failing to maintain inherited cities. That's why we took pride in Wakanda, a fictional city opposite to African reality. Let's change the way we think. Chinese don't complain about how they were once oppressed. Let's move forward towards progression. What would your response be to that?
Well, I do respect the views of the listener, but I think our dear friend is actually misinterpreting what we are doing. What does a victim do? A victim says, "Oh, this happened to me. Oh, I feel sorry for myself." No, we are taking action. You know, we are saying don't agonize, organize. Okay? Don't agonize, organize. So the Africa Fact Book is actually a process of organizing ourselves and doing things ourselves, because no one will do it for ourselves. So it is not playing the victim role, it is playing the actor role. You know, there are 3 or 4 or 5 things we could do. Okay, some right now don't know what is happening in the world, but we are saying with the small efforts that we can contribute, we want to make things happen. And the Book of African Records, as well as the Africa Fact Book, are about Africans making things happen, not playing the victim role.
So on the back of that, you're talking about there are groups of people that have no access to information and that sort of thing. And one of the things that's always been an issue is that works of this nature tend not to filter down to poor and marginalized communities who will still only access certain types of information. What will be done to make sure that the Africa Fact Book is available to the poor and marginalized?
No, we will make sure that the people of Africa, that's why at the conference we shall be having, for example, UNESCO. That's why we shall be having UNICEF, those who are actively involved with children. That's why we shall be having the African Union, which has got a department that focuses on the marginalized communities, because we want our people to be as informed as possible. We know that there is an ongoing global war of information which is catastrophic economic consequences, and therefore we will strive to make sure that the publication reaches the furthest it can.
0731 168 I think the question on the first part on the question of access, I think you've just answered that. But someone says, does it have facts about African spirituality issues and information on indigenous belief systems?
Yeah, the Africa Fact Book touches on measurable information. So if you can't measure it, we can't put it in the book.
Okay, so explain an example.
An example of what we can have in the book. Okay.
The difference between something that can't be measured.
Okay, something that can be measured is something that you can put in length, in breadth, in dates, in time, things that you simply cannot mathematically or logically verify or argue on. Whereas the spirituality that you're talking about are things that are untouchable, things that we can't calculate, but they inform our struggle. So Pan-Africanism is the spirit that is driving the creation of the Africa Fact Book, the re-emergence of Africa as a dominant global player. We have been before. is driving us to do the big things that we are talking about.
Okay, so just as a follow-on from that question, though, is, as you said earlier, you even referenced at the Bible, which is a spiritual reference, is something that you say people can debate over. Wouldn't it be oversight on your part not to include indigenous, belief systems, even knowledge systems?
No, I didn't say we will not include them. Of course, we will include information about the existence of this and that belief system.
Mm-hmm.
What we are saying is we will not go beyond mentioning the fact of the existence of those beliefs, but we will not become an advocate of those belief systems, because Africa is so diverse, with so many languages, more than 2,200 languages in Africa. The fact book is neutral. The fact book is an observer and is blind to what is non-factual.
I'm going to make reference to something else in your diary. I'm going to paraphrase, because you wrote about it quite at length. You said you speak of a nasty experience in Mali where you were robbed at knife point by a man who the police had assigned to take you to a motel at a checkpoint, from a checkpoint, or when you were rescued from being killed to be eaten by cannibals in Congo Brazzaville. Given such experiences, right? Some people, what maintains your interest in African fact development? Because someone will say, I might as well just run away from this.
Larry, I had even crazier situations. For example, I will not mention the country, but I was in some African country, and the police stopped me. I was given a ticket that, my radio was too loud. But apparently my radio was not even working. And I said, officer, you're saying my radio is too loud, but look, it's not even working. Then he said, oh, yeah. We will ticket you for not having a radio. Because when the head of state is making a speech, how are you going to listen? So, these experiences repeated themselves. But it is part of what Africa is. Africa is not just the great sun, the great sunrise and sunset and the beautiful sights. We have crocodiles and snakes and bees in Africa. It is a dangerous place, as they say, but that is what makes Africa the most beautiful place to be in the world.
Okay, so and then just before we go, just a repetition of the event that we have coming on the 5th of March.
Yes. So we are having the Africa Fact Book International Stakeholders and Fundraising Conference on the 5th of March at Rainbow Towers in Harare. We are expecting African countries, most of them have confirmed, African regional economic communities, multilateral international organizations, and individuals, corporates who are coming to the conference to participate at the conceptual stage, this conceptual stage of the emergence of the Africa Fact Book. And Larry, I can guarantee you, 5 years from now, the number one source of reference and information about Africa will be the Africa Fact Book.
And if I'm listening at home, is it something that I can attend?
Well, attending, especially for the conference, is by invitation to, governments who are representing their citizens. Speakers who have been invited. But we've got a fundraising afternoon between 12:30 and 2:30 p.m. where it is free to attend. A plate will be costing, however, $200. So those who would want to eat but at the same time support the Africa Fact Book in a big way are very much welcome to the conference between 12:30 and 2:30 p.m.
Ambassador Kwame Muzawazi, thank you very much for coming in. He's the founder and CEO of the Book of African Records, which is signed an MOU with the African Union Commission and to produce the African Fact Book. And as you heard, an event is taking place here in Harare on the 5th of March. Thank you very much for coming through, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank you very much to our patient listeners.
Yes, and thank you, of course, again to the listeners and for everybody who contributed to what was a riveting discussion. Other than that, I say take care of yourself and the people that you love. My name is Larry Kwirirayi, and I'll be back with you next week. But as I say, from where I come from, Gobulawayo, Asilu, Siyasebenza. Take care of yourself.
Connect with CFM Stereo via Facebook on facebook.com/CFM Stereo.